Welcome to Decision Moments. Decision Moments is a program of the United Nations system in Rwanda that interrogates issues of development challenges in Africa, particularly the development issues that are protracted and persistent, and we speak to leaders and decision makers from Rwanda but across Africa and the world in trying to find solutions to those challenges. My name is Ozonia Ojielo, your host. My guest today is Martin Chungong, the Secretary General of the Interparliamentary Union. Mr. Chungong, welcome to Decision Moments.
Thank you very much for welcoming me here to this program. Looking forward to our conversation.
So when I look at the website of the IPU, it boldly celebrates the fact that you are the first African and first non-European to be elected Secretary General. The IPU was established in 1889. How does one explain that?
Yeah, well, this is an organization that was created by Europeans. It's true that at some point, at the beginning, you had other non-European countries, such as Liberia being a member of the IPU way back in 1889. And over the years, the focus was on Europe. From a handful of members of parliament, the organization has grown into a global one, and it needed then to reflect the fact that they're a global organization. But it's true that for years, for decades, the Europeans were in the driving seat. The organization was very Eurocentric. But given various factors that have come into play, the organization has opened up to the rest of the world. And I believed the time had come for somebody else from a different part of the world to assume leadership of the organization in order to reflect this evolution.
Thank you. So what brings you to Kigali?
What brings me to Kigali is the 145th Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union, the global organization of parliaments. We come here to celebrate parliamentary diplomacy with Rwanda, and so over the past 4 or 5 days we have been mobilizing the global parliamentary community represented within the IPU in order to help identify pathways towards resolving some of the burning issues on the global agenda. So the 145th Assembly is to the IPU as the United Nations General Assembly is to the UN.
I see. So it is interesting that the theme of this year's assembly is gender equality and gender-sensitive parliaments as drivers of change for a more resilient and peaceful world. What's your scorecard for your member parliaments?
I must say that the organization as one that promotes democracy and human rights as a principle and value is very insistent on having both sexes at the table. If we want to achieve human rights, we want to achieve development, then decision-making processes, governance processes must be informed in equal measure by men and women. So we do have a strong women's movement within the IPU, and that movement has helped us push for progress internationally, globally, for women's political participation. Let me just give you some statistics. In Beijing in 1995, the proportion of women in parliament was a little under 11%. But since Beijing, that figure has shot up to 26.4% today. And I must say, with some degree of modesty, that this increase has been achieved thanks in some measure to the efforts of the IPU that has played an advocacy role trying to highlight the importance of gender equality, but also helping develop tools that would help countries implement this very noble value and vision of gender equality. So the figures are there, they speak for themselves. And we meet in a country, Rwanda, that is a pioneer in this regard. In parliament, we have women who account for 61.25% of the membership. This is extraordinary. And Rwanda has occupied this leading position for several years now. there is some, I would say, advantage in this, that others will understand that a country like Rwanda that is finding its feet when it comes to governance, democracy, is able to achieve something that longer-standing democracies have not achieved. And I think that this is something that we need to highlight. We have been able to help the United Nations when it comes to tracking progress on the SDGs related to women's political empowerment. We do provide the statistics because we collect data on women's political participation. And so at any given moment, we can tell you how many women are in each of the 193 parliaments in the world today. And this helps then to provide a better analysis of how women are being included in processes, whether it's in government or in parliament. I think this is something that we need to do, but I want to stress that progress has been made, but then it is still very slow. And it has been estimated that if we are to achieve full gender equality, that is gender parity in parliament, maybe at this pace it will take us another 50 years. Of course, we don't want that to happen. We want to accelerate this progress. And that is why we find this assembly in Kigali very important, because with a focus on gender equality, with a focus on the contribution of women and men to more resilient and sustainable processes, we can jumpstart the movement for greater women's political empowerment on the basis of a lucid analysis of what we have achieved so far in the area of gender equality, identifying the stumbling blocks, the impediments to women's emancipation, and looking at how we can address this collectively as the global parliamentary organization.
Thank you. Are there any trends that you see that are positive from your members? Because if you take Africa, for example, it seems like Rwanda is an outlier. Because there's been some progress, but there have been many reversals in parts of Africa. So making this subject the theme for this year's assembly, are there any commitments you are getting from some of the leaders of your national parliaments of enacting the legislation that enables acceleration for women's participation and representation in parliament?
Yes, I think there are commitments that are being made. We are celebrating this year the 10th anniversary of the IPU Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments. And it is an opportunity for parliaments to recommit to improving upon their performance. And there's a lot of positive development that we can be proud of. The number of countries that have achieved gender parity has increased, and the statistics are there. And when I travel around the world, leaders are only too glad to show me where they are on our political representation map. They're doing well. They always want to point out to me that we're doing well. At this assembly, we have been having discussions with a number of delegations. And if I may reveal a secret, I have been talking this morning with the Speaker of the Nigerian House of Representatives, looking at how we can help Nigeria. We have a program with Nigeria that is intended to promote better representation of women in political life. And we were looking at what are the challenges that are being faced by Nigeria and how we can address this together. And I'm pleased to say that he was very committed to working with us to drive up those numbers of women in Nigeria. And we're having this in many other countries. And for instance, yesterday I was speaking to the Speaker of the Transitional Assembly in Mali. The legislative framework that they've put in place for the future elections at the end of next year provides for 34% of women in parliament. This is way above the global average of 26.4%. So there is evidence out there that progress is being made. We have to build on this progress. But I must say that if we're complacent, gender equality is very fragile. All the progress that we have made, if we're not careful, will come unraveled if we are not very vigilant and we are not dogged in our efforts to support the movement. And that is the role of the IPU, to make sure that the spotlight is shone on a regular or ongoing basis on the need for gender parity in Parliament. And I may be jumping the gun back to say that we want to walk the talk in the IPU. We are not just telling people, do this. We are doing it in the IPU. And maybe we can talk about the mechanisms that we have put in place to show that the IPU itself as an institution is walking the talk when it comes to gender equality.
Excellent. Let's come to something that is a little more urgent, the cost of living crisis that we are facing in many parts of the world today, and particularly in Africa. And so how is the Assembly dealing with this issue? It's cost of living, you have energy crisis, you have the debt crisis. Many developing countries in Africa are entrapped because of the mobilizing resources to be able to address the impact of COVID-19, but now also the energy and fuel crisis.
Yes, the IPU has a mechanism whereby there is a debate, a general debate in the Assembly where countries come and really address those issues that are of particular concern to them. And although this time the focus is on gender equality, of course you're looking at other aspects of global life and seeing how the global community can help this. Of course, you can say also that this is just talking, but beside that, we have mechanisms in the IPU that are intended to address those issues that you have raised. For instance, we have a standing mechanism, that we call the Parliamentary Conference on the WTO. It is that conference that works towards a more equitable, rules-based international system, addressing those issues that you have referred to: fair trading practices, removing barriers to trade, giving access to essential commodities to the countries that are most vulnerable in Africa. And we work hand in hand with the World Trade Organization. So you have the parliamentary track working with the governmental track to address these issues. And we think that it's even more important to mobilize parliaments in various countries so that they can push for more accountability by their governments when it comes to policies and measures that are intended to alleviate poverty, for instance. And also now we have a standing mechanism on the SDGs. The SDGs, as you know, are the blueprint for lifting the world's population out of poverty, and it lays emphasis on the role that legislative bodies around the world can play to drive progress in this particular instance. And so we've built this into our working methods. We have a standing committee on sustainable development that provides the policy framework within which we can now develop programs in cooperation with partners such as the United Nations Development Program to bring the SDGs home to parliaments and tell them these are the things that you can do to move the sustainable development agenda forward. You need to use your political powers, the powers that are there in your constitution, to drive progress. That is the role of the IPU, to kind of spur action by parliaments. And there's evidence out there that they are doing it. There are many parliaments that have created dedicated SDGs committees. There are others that have mainstreamed SDGs into all of their working structures. Depends on how you want to approach this, but there is evidence, ample evidence, that parliaments are at the forefront of this campaign to implement the SDGs that have the potential to resolve some of those issues that you have referred to.
So are you seeing a sense of urgency among your member parliaments, particularly on the cost of living crisis? There's so much social discontent in many of our societies today, and social protests are on the move, arising, social movements are on the move. And many are questioning where are our parliaments in helping address this issue. Somebody says to me a couple of days ago, why should all of Africa be complaining because one country is not able to ship grain and it impacts the rest of the continent? And there's so much unfarmed land in Africa. And this is the part of the oversight function of the parliament. So how much is these global values and approaches, how much are they trickling down to the member parliaments, and how much energies are they putting forward to address these issues?
Yeah, yes, I must say that yes, parliaments, at least those that are involved in the IPU, are fully aware of the urgency of these issues. And the very presence of thousands of parliamentarians here in Kigali to address burning issues, emerging issues, and topical issues that are of concern to the people is already testament to the sense of urgency that they feel. Otherwise they would not be here. So they're coming here to compare notes, to identify things that they can do collectively and individually in order to live up to the expectations of the people. And you will see during this assembly that over and above the speeches that are being made in the plenary of the assembly, there are a host of other side meetings that are taking place on issues that are close to the hearts of the citizens. Whether you're talking about access to healthy food in the context of food security, whether you're talking about access to vaccines to improve upon health standards, equitable access to other commodities, addressing issues of migration, all of these discussions are taking place in the context of this assembly. And the advantage, I think, what we have going for us here is that a lot of the, I don't want to use that term, but let me use it, wheeling and dealing takes place on the sidelines of the assembly. A lot is going on between partners, whether they are in the developed north, global north, or in the developing global south. There are lots of discussions going on and deals are being struck in the interest of the people. But let me go back to the question again that you asked about trust. I think the underlying question is the loss of faith in governing institutions, including parliament. I am very lucid in my assessment, in my admission, that is a major challenge facing parliaments today. In many societies, parliaments are not seen to be delivering on the expectations of the people. We want, through the IPU, to change this narrative. We want parliaments to reclaim legitimacy, and reclaiming legitimacy means that they have to make democracy work for the people. We cannot conceive of democracy, human rights in abstract terms. If democracy and parliaments can't put food on the table, can't provide adequate health care or access to health care, can't allow families to send their children to school, to have decent education, then democracy and parliaments are failing the people. And that is what the IPU doesn't want to be obtaining in the world today. And so we are pushing parliaments all the time to take action. And I personally, I am comfortable in doing that because I have scrutinized the constitutional framework in all the countries in the world. And in virtually all countries, parliaments have functions and prerogatives well enshrined in the constitution of the land. Lawmaking, budget allocation, oversight of government to make sure that government is accountable and is delivering, because that's not the role of parliament. It is governments that have to implement policies for the well-being of the people, but parliament should oversee that, and generally representing people. These powers are enshrined in constitutions, and what we are doing is challenge parliaments to come out there and use those powers in order to make a difference for their people. That's the role of the IPU. Making democracy, if you look at our logo, is democracy for everyone. Democracy not only in terms of values and principles that we need to uphold, but also the benefits thereof that can accrue to the citizen at the end of the day.
So it brings us to the challenge we see today in many parts of the world. The failures of democracy to resonate, to be translated in the ordinary lives of the people. So now we're seeing rising cases of unconstitutional changes in government. And who are the first to speak out to support the unconstitutional change? Political leaders. Some of them political leaders in parliament. So how are you holding your member parliaments to account in addressing these failures of governance, but also in lauding, the unconstitutional changes of government and accepting positions to participate in those new governments?
Yeah, the thing is, this is a point that I raised, a sore point that I raised when I delivered my opening speech to this assembly a few days ago. I did point to the worrying trend of coups taking place, especially on the African continent. It is something that the IPU as an institution cannot condone. We don't agree that you can accede to power irrespective of the conditions that are prevailing. You can accede to power through the barrel of the gun. You know, you have to follow constitutional processes. But we do understand that a lot of the upheavals that we have witnessed have been born out of popular discontent with governance. And so we are challenged to fix that, the governance. And to come back to your question, I don't think that you have to lump all of the political class into a single category. There are those who have been discredited and who are being thrown out of office because they have become discredited. But you also have politicians who have acted with good intentions and have worked in opposition to the malpractice by the political class. So we have to make that distinction between those that have been critical of and constructive, have engaged in constructive dialogue to review processes. That's one point I want to make. The other thing is that while parliaments in these countries are being dissolved as a result of the coup, one thing that coup leaders are keen to do is to restore some form of legislative body, which means that there is some faith and trust in the legislative body in a generic fashion. There is a trust that they can do something, they need to be there. So when Guinea overthrows the government, the military are keen to establish a transitional national assembly. When Mali does the same thing, they're keen to organize a transitional national council. Yes, national council they're called. And they're all coming to the IPU because they want us to help them. And my reaction is that yes, we reject coups, we do not agree with coups, but let's work with the authorities that have come to power and make sure that things change in the sense that a new legislative framework is in place, that elections are held according to international norms and standards, and that resulting institutions out of those elections can now be seen to be performing on behalf of the people. And that is why in the IPU I have not advocated for the expulsion of Mali, Guinea, Chad. No, but Burkina Faso, we don't have a choice because they don't have a parliament. If they do have a transitional parliament tomorrow, I would be the first to say, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and work with that transitional authority to restore constitutional order as soon as possible. So again, sometimes some people tend to be understanding of this chaos that leads to coups and change of government, you know, because of the popular uprising. It's understandable, but we should work to ensure that such situations don't become a pandemic, and that there should be the exception that confirms the rule. The rule is that government emanates from the will of the people and serves the people in an equitable and fair manner. And that is what the IPU wants to do through parliaments, because parliaments that are representative of the people, inclusive in the way they are composed and in the issues, the way they address issues, are well placed to respond positively to the expectations of the people.
So coming back to the question of then trust of parliaments, many countries, and in Africa, majority of the countries in Africa are not on track to meet the SDGs. Yes. So the dashboard by the Economic Commission for Africa shows significant gaps in the target in many countries. Some progress in some, but actually in some it's reversals. Would it be right to say that many parliaments are failing in the oversight functions for this outcome? And what percentage of the blame would you assign to your member parliaments?
I must say that we haven't done an analysis to see what percentage you could ascribe to parliament. But I want to say that achieving the SDGs is not the sole responsibility of parliaments. There are many stakeholders involved. Governments, primarily, parliaments, civil society, the private sector now. It's a combination of the actions of all the stakeholders that allows you to achieve the SDGs. And I believe I want to offer that so far we have not had strong coalitions of all these partners working together in the same direction. Of course, everybody has their own interests and stakes that they want to protect, and so they may not all be moving in the same direction. But I do think that it is important to federate all these actors in support of the SDGs. And we are preaching this for our parliaments. As I told you, it is a standing feature of our programs now. We have a dedicated, first of all, dedicated Standing Committee on Sustainable Development to spur progress towards the implementation of the SDGs. And we do know and acknowledge, and the UN has acknowledged that parliaments have a critical role to play in the implementation of the SDGs. And so we're pushing our parliaments to do that, developing different types of tools, including an assessment of whether parliaments are fit for purpose or not. Are they able to help push forward the SDG agenda? And if they think, through these self-assessments that we do, if they think that they are not fit for purpose, how can we help them as the umbrella organization of parliaments to meet those expectations? And for this, we work not only as the parliamentary body, basically we're political in nature, we try to articulate the political views of our members, and so we reach out to other stakeholders. In the United Nations system, we know UNDP is, I think, the dedicated body that can help drive progress along the path of development. So we work primarily with them. We do work with other institutions such as UNFCCC, but also since some access to health has become an area of focus for the IPU, we are working increasingly with the WHO, with the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, with the Sun Movement, each in their area to spur parliamentary action in support of stronger nutritional standards, food security, access to health, universal health coverage, and all of that. And today, if you go and ask the parliamentarians attending this meeting whether they are aware of the need for universal health coverage, I'm sure 90% of them would tell you, yes, we are aware and we're willing to take action according to guidelines that have been provided by the IPU and WHO. This is no mean feat. So for me, I think that we should not cry over spilled milk. Instead, we should rededicate ourselves, recommit ourselves to contributing robustly to the achievement of the SDGs by 2030. It may be unrealistic, but as somebody would say, we need to be optimistic of the value of Parliament in doing this.
So as we begin to wind down this interview, what would success look like for you?
Success for me?
Yes.
First of all, I think that we are going to adopt a declaration here in Kigali, the Kigali Declaration, which shines the spotlight on gender equality and what it is that will take us to that milestone of gender equality. We think that success will be measured by the degree of adhesion by our members to that declaration. And when you have that, it becomes a blueprint for us to prosecute the gender equality agenda in a more robust manner. That is something that I think we will obtain, given the fact that we are having our assembly in the land of gender equality, Rwanda. But also, as I said, there are many other things that are going on here. And just a few moments ago, the General Assembly adopted a resolution on the war in Ukraine. And that has given the opportunity for the global parliamentary membership to express its condemnation of this flagrant violation of international law by a member state of the United Nations. It is very clear, and that is the role of the IPU, to uphold the rule of law internationally and nationally. That has been done, and I think the majority with which that resolution has been carried shows that the IPU is true to its vision of a peaceful world that shuns violence, shuns violation of international law. More importantly, we are looking ahead. We are looking ahead, and there you may know that the IPU established several months ago a task force on Ukraine, which is intended to help efforts being carried out at the governmental level to resolve the crisis in Ukraine. First of all, to stop the killing of innocent people, stop wanton destruction and damage to property and infrastructure, and then build a standing mechanism for addressing some of the underlying issues that have led to where we are today. And I want to say that that task force has achieved some measure of progress because maybe I'm being immodest, but we are basically one of the very few institutions in the world today that have the Russians and the Ukrainians talking to us. They're not sitting at the same table at this moment, but they're willing to use the IPU as the mediator. And this is no mean feat. It is a big achievement for the organization, and it helps us to remain true to the founding visions of our forefathers, that of dialogue being the choice means of resolving disputes. Our founding fathers said, you don't want to go to war, you don't want to take up arms to resolve dispute. And so we've gone back to the basics, as they say. This is a big achievement, I think, for us, and which I would like to highlight for television here. I must say that one of the reasons why we brought this assembly to Kigali was for the global community to come and witness the transformation of this country. Many of them are stuck in their minds to 1994, when the genocide happened here. They don't realize that Rwanda has moved on, and it has been, I think, an eye-opener for many people. And it can serve as a lesson that you don't have to always moan over your misfortune. You can pick yourself up and drive your own success. And that is a message that I think is coming out of this assembly for us.
You have been credited with transforming the IPU. You've just been elected to an unprecedented third term. You've transformed it, the work of IPU and the parliaments. So imagine a young boy or young girl in some remote part of Africa, and they hear your story, and they want to be like you in the future. What pathway would you recommend them to walk? How could they be? What do they need to do to be a future Chungong?
Well, I think you have to have vision. I encourage people to have a vision. And Martin Chungong didn't set out to be a top diplomat, but I had this vision, I had this aspiration to be helpful to my fellow human beings. And the IPU gave me that opportunity to make a difference in the lives of the people. You've made the point that I was first African, non-European, to be Secretary General. Yes, I am honored to have been given this opportunity, but it's also a big challenge, and that's what drives me. I also tell them that, I didn't come from a well-to-do family who they say, okay, he had a privileged position and he could rise to this. I rose from the ranks, and I tend to liken myself to the late Kofi Annan, who went through the ranks in the UN to become Secretary General. I went through the ranks of the IPU to become Secretary General. And I want to believe that the membership of the organization did entrust me with this responsibility because they thought I would do something that would be beneficial to the organization. I continue to be motivated because I see huge potential in parliaments and parliamentary diplomacy in the effort that we are all engaged in to build a world that is better for mankind. And I must say that I'm proud of some of those achievements that you have referred to tacitly. We have an organization that is very robust today, an organization that is very agile in responding to crisis. You know, you don't want to wait for 10 years, or no, 3 years to address the burning issue of Ukraine. This organization is on top of the burning issues there. Talk about sustainable development. Parliaments are there, being mobilized by the IPU. Talk about access to vaccines. The IPU is there. A message to the young people. You have to have a big vision, which may be unrealistic, but you have to be optimistic that you can make a difference. Even in a small way, it counts. It adds up. And that's.
Martin Chungong, welcome to Decision Moments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear viewers, for being with us. My guest has been Martin Chungong, the General Secretary of the Interparliamentary Union. We thank you for being with us today, and we hope you will tune in again for another edition of Decision Moments. Goodbye.